everyone, and welcome. I'm so happy that you're here with us today. I'm Julia Cutler, and I'm excited to be joined by Colin Coggins and Garrett Brown, longtime sales leaders, professors, authors, startup advisors, and investors. Welcome, Colin and Garrett. We're happy to have you.
Yeah, we're
Thank
excited
you.
to be here.
Great. I'm going to give some quick housekeeping information for our guests, for our audience, and then we'll learn a little bit more about our guest. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please click the comments question button right below the video to submit your questions throughout the presentation. And as a reminder, the recording will be available tomorrow. Now, to properly introduce our guests. Colin Coggins and Garrett Brown are co-founders of Agency 18, which works with mission-driven businesses to grow revenue based on their unique and authentic approach to mindset for leaders and sellers. With decades of experience as practitioners and with multiple exits under their belts, they co-authored the book, The Unsold Mindset, which recently became a bestseller. Colin and Garrett also teach a class that they created called Sales Mindset for Entrepreneurs, and it's the only sales mindset class of its kind in higher education. It has become one of the most popular classes because of its unique blend of personal and professional development. Thank you for joining us today, Colin and Garrett, and I'll let you take it away from here.
Thanks, Julia.
Cool.
What's up, Colin?
Hey, bud. How are
Good
you?
morning. We've been looking forward to this one for a long time, it feels like. We've had this on the calendar forever.
Yeah, this is exciting. We don't always know when we are talking to our people, but I think we feel very confident in saying that today.
Definitely. So we've got an hour here. I'm thinking we'll just add a couple of quick context bits to that intro that Julie just gave, and we will then take this crew along with us on our little journey that we've been on, from writing a book about what we thought was going to be a book about the mindset of great salespeople, and ultimately learning about the mindset of successful executives and parents and employees and leaders and everything in between. And then if I can shut you up long enough, we will leave some time for Q&A of the last 10 or 15 minutes. And then, we'll let everybody go on their way. What did I miss?
What you did not miss is making fun of me in the first 36 seconds of recording. Well, let's lead with vulnerability here. Garrett and I just found out that we debuted on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list like last week, like the week the book came out. So we are in a whirlwind and we are so grateful and excited. And we were talking about this last night, and it doesn't feel like there's a better group to spend that with, spend that time with in this place mentally that we're in, and with you guys. And I think we say that because we are either in a room full of learners or a room full of knowers, depending on which room we're in. And to know that we're in a room full of learners is really exciting for us, because we're talking about, no matter who you are, if you're talking about your people, if you're talking about your students, or if you're talking about the people that you're trying to build relationships with, all of these people have access to the same content, right? Like everybody has access to the TED Talks and to the books and to the webinars, but yet in any given organization, 20% of the people are thriving and the other 80% are trying to figure it out. And so the question is always, if everyone is looking at the same content, why are only 20% thriving off of it and the other 80% trying to figure it out? And we think it has a lot to do with how you consume the content as a learner or as a knower. And like I said, we're in a room full of learners today. It's not always the case. We're excited. And I just talked extra long on purpose just to piss my partner off, because he gave me a jab in the first 17 seconds.
Fair enough.
Let's do it.
Well, here's the real quick intro context that I was talking about that I think is worth knowing. The first thing is that I did not start out my career thinking that I would be sitting here on a webinar talking to a couple thousand people about mindset and leadership and selling. I started my career as a lawyer, and I hated every 6 minutes that I had to count to do my billable hours of it. It was not for me. And so I think just the fact that I did not start out as a salesperson, as a professor, will color some of the things that we talk about here. And the second thing is that once I finally did break into startups and entrepreneurship, and I did that through the sales organization, I didn't go through a normal career trajectory. I didn't have traditional trainings. I didn't have a playbook that I had built up over many years. I sort of got thrown into it. In my first startup, I joined as a salesperson because that's usually an easy way to get into the startup world. And after a few months, I had some success, and the person who hired me got hired away to a different company. And the new CEO brought me into his office and said, "Hey, do you think you can keep doing what you've been doing?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I can keep doing that." And he said, "Great, you now run sales and business development." And so that was my first introduction to the meritocracy of startups and of selling. And it was just thrown into the fire. So, after building a career and meeting Colin at a company called Bidium, which we eventually built up and sold to Google, Colin and I started finding ourselves on stages and on webinars like this and in our classroom, and then writing our book. And I think that just that unusual and sort of untraditional background of not having the typical foundation of a sales or a leadership career will color a lot of what we talk about here today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important for you to know that I had no idea that everybody sold when I was in college. Like, I certainly didn't go to college to become a salesperson. And I didn't know that the leader that I wanted to become meant that I had to be better than most at selling ideas and selling myself. Like, those things did not exist. In fact, I had a real disdain for sales, like just an utter disrespect. Maybe my mom's father being a traveling salesman had something to do with it, but regardless, it wasn't something that was a respectable career for me. And when I graduated college, I just had two choices, which was move back in with my parents or take the first job that was offered to me. And that job was a sales job. So I took it, experienced karma for the first time. I was horrible, like the worst salesperson you've ever met, entitled, great blame displacement, couldn't close a door, let alone a person. And on my third month, they put me on a PIP, which I hope none of you know what that means. But if you do, it's a performance improvement plan. Hopefully you're giving them out and you've never received them. It just means you're going to get fired. And so I was going to get fired on my third month, 21 years old, fresh out of school, in a job I hated, wasn't good, about to get whacked. And so I did what I think any normal 21-year-old who just graduated college and is going to get fired does on his way out, which is I tried to screw over the establishment. And I was intentional about it. Like, I dare you to fire me early. I stopped reading the script. I stopped abiding by the dress code. I only asked questions I wanted to know the answers to. I only laughed at jokes that I thought were funny. I only asked people to buy when I actually thought there was value in that purchase. I mean, very weird things. And that was the month that I broke the sales record on accident, right? That was like sort of this unlocking moment where I realized that the greatest salespeople on the planet are the opposite of who people are expecting them to be. And the moment that I started treating these people like humans was the moment they started treating me like humans. And then there was no adversarial relationship. We were on the same team. And I'm giving you that story in detail because over the next 6 years, I became, the youngest director of sales, and the youngest trainer, and like all of these accolades that aren't important. What's important is that from 22 to 27, I was leading teams of hundreds of people, most of them older than me, just trying to teach them how to be the opposite of good. And that was really the starting point for my career. I ended up, going into business intelligence and going into entertainment and having a really great tech leadership run. And the last company I was at was an entertainment company, and we got acquired. And this recruiter called me and he said, "Hey, I know you think that the entertainment industry is sexy, but do you want to know what's really sexy?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Software security." And that's when I met Garrett. And that was a long intro, but I want everyone to understand that when I met Garrett in that room, okay, the same conversation we had in that room, the first time that we met, Garrett had polka dot socks on. I had no-show socks on. Couldn't be two people, more different. And we sat in a room for what was supposed to be 30 minutes. And 2 hours later, we were talking about the same thing that we talk about every webinar, every keynote, every class, the book. It's all the same thing. Like, we caught this vibe and we were sharing these experiences about how the greatest salespeople on the planet weren't extroverts, and that they weren't gregarious, and that they weren't, handsome and pretty and sociable and self-confident. That's not who they were. They were the most self-aware people in the room. Like, they were able to say some stuff, knew it didn't land, able to course correct real time. Talking to people, knowing that people don't think that they're listening, knowing that people think they're waiting to speak, and being able to change. They're like not naive, but definitely optimistic. But that, what it looked like was people that were having conversations with other people that didn't need anything from them, Because if you think someone's already going to buy, if you already think that they're your people, then obviously, like, why would you try to get something from them? And so I'm giving you a lot of context because we're going to get into, some of the specifics, but just so that all of you understand where we're at with this leadership conversation. A third of our class shows up every week to Sales Mindset for Entrepreneurs, the only sales mindset class we know of in all of higher education. They show up every week because they want to learn how to sell themselves. They want to be leaders. They want to build relationships. They want people to know that they have their back. They want people to want to run through walls for them. And then, a third of these people, they want to sell ideas. They also want to be leaders. They also want to be entrepreneurs, but they also want to be engineers. And they also want to be marketers. They want to be creators. And then a third of the class shows up every single day because they want to sell products or services. But, that's everyone in the world if you think about those three buckets. I'm going to shut up. Stop smiling.
That diversity that we see in our classes, it's the same diversity that we started seeing in the conversations we were having as we were building the curriculum for the class and as we were writing this book. And it makes sense because, like Colin's saying, everybody sells. And at this point, that's almost a cliche. But if you're not selling a product or service, you're selling yourself when you're trying to get a job. You're selling your ideas, trying to make things happen. If you have kids and you're trying to get them to eat their broccoli, you're selling. If you have a partner, a spouse, you're trying to sell them on where you should go get food for dinner on Friday night. Every time that you're trying to kind of influence and inspire and persuade, that's selling. And we all do it all the time. So we went on this crazy journey that I mentioned earlier, where we started writing a book about salespeople and their mindset and ended up writing a book about the mindset of all of the most successful leaders and people on the planet. And that journey really started with two questions. And the first question that we would ask people, salespeople and non-salespeople alike, we would say, what do you think of when you hear the word salesperson? And you can imagine the answers that we got. It's exactly what you all are thinking right now. It's smarmy, it's pushy, it's manipulative. We'll hear used car a lot. Every once in a while, somebody's feeling a little bit magnanimous and they'll say, extroverted or hardworking, but there's always a subtext. And it's really clear that in general, society at large does not like salespeople.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure this is an honest group. And in the live room, we ask people just to say it out loud and they offend us. There's a second question that we ask, which is, who's the greatest salesperson you can think of? And the answers, the top two answers, and by the way, we ask this to thousands of people. Every single keynote that we do, we lead with these two questions. The top two answers are Martin Luther King Jr. and Steve Jobs. A close third is Jesus, and a close fourth is a family member, typically a parent or a kid. So think about that incongruence. When we ask people what they think of when they hear the word salesperson, they say yucky, manipulative, pushy. And we ask someone who the greatest salesperson is they know, they say Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr. And that incongruence is honestly where we started this journey. And we went out and we wanted to interview the greatest sales professionals out there. We weren't actually on a journey to look for leaders. We were looking for sales professionals with sales in their title to figure out why they were good and then to figure out who they thought the greatest sales professionals were. And every time we asked them who the greatest salesperson was that they knew, they were pointing to a leader. They were pointing to someone that didn't have sales in their title, to the point where our entire trajectory of our book changed. We were going to like the salesperson, the number one salesperson at Beyond Meat, and asking him, who's the greatest salesperson, and he points to the general manager of Adidas influencer marketing. Who points to Nick Adler, who's like the leader of Web 3.0 in the entertainment industry, who points to Snoop Dogg, who reinvented like what it means to be like these. The point that we're trying to make is that we ran into lawyers and doctors and chefs and more entrepreneurs than you know of. All of these people were told by us from the greatest sales professionals that we could find that those were the greatest salespeople they've ever met.
And the crazy thing is, as we're talking to this hugely diverse group of people, they're all sounding exactly the same, even though they were from different industries, from different backgrounds, different geographic regions. They sounded exactly the same and they didn't even know it. And so the reason that we called our book The Unsold Mindset is because one of the biggest things that all these people had in common is that they're unsold on who they're supposed to be in whatever it is that they're doing. They're unsold on who the people around them expect them to be. They're unsold on the way they're supposed to do things. They're unsold on what their customers and their employees and people surrounding them expect from them. And so, in any situation that we're in, we all have this box that we think we're supposed to fit into. If we're a salesperson, we think we're supposed to know all the answers and be able to overcome objections and have every detail about our products right in our back pocket so that we can bring it up right away. If we're a parent, we have a box that we think we're supposed to fit in. It doesn't matter what our role is. We have this box. But all of these unsold people that we spoke to, they did not worry about the box, and they did things their own way.
Mm-hmm. They were hyper authentic. Yeah, we always get concerned when we use the word authentic, out the gate, because it's such a buzzword and it's so easy, to say. But like the reality is that we were finding that what these great sellers and these great leaders were doing, where they were creating an infrastructure to mitigate inauthenticity, unbeknownst to them, right? That they were even doing it. I mean, in the book, we call it intentional ignorance. And listen, this is intentional ignorance. It's also intelligent ignorance. But we all know that, what we're good at and what we love doing aren't always the same thing. And we found throughout this journey that these great leaders were figuring out a way to find the areas of their job that they would do for free and show up that way every time and figure out a way to intentionally ignore the stuff that was bringing them down and doing the exact opposite. And it was we saw it in multiple ways. We interviewed a great seller, was number one at Adobe, Cisco. I mean, now he's amazing. And they say that he sells the unsellable, which is a really big claim. So we're like, why do they call you that? Why do they say that you sell the unsellable? What's the secret sauce? And he laughs because I don't have a secret sauce. He was like, I'm the same person at the bar as I am, with my clients. Maybe that's my secret sauce. And we're like, okay, well, like walk us through, like how you get ready for a deal. He's like, well, typically, like I have the lead. I only look at the name. I won't look at, any of the information, like firmographic information. And I'll show up like excited to understand some stuff about them that I don't know. And Garrett and I look at each other like we're crazy. We're like, you don't look at the firmographic information. You don't look at the data, like the stuff that they're providing to you so that you have a better chance at selling. And he goes, no, like I know the propensity of someone who's going to buy in the Northeast versus the Southwest. He's like, if I know that, I'm going to show up differently. Like now he didn't say, I have a high sales IQ and my self-awareness is completely leading me in the right. He didn't know any of that. He just knew what worked for him, which was if he's going to make a judgment call, he's going to do it based off of what he knows, not what he heard about the prospect. And he sells the unsellable.
And then we started seeing this in a whole bunch of different scenarios. It wasn't just salespeople. Like, in fact, somebody just reached out to us this week who had read our book, and she's a personal trainer. And she said that, she does not like talking about nutrition. She doesn't understand, or she doesn't like talking about macronutrients and calorie counting. She likes talking about the physical element of what she does and not necessarily the scientific element of what she does. So what she was able to do to remain intentionally ignorant was go out and find somebody who loves talking about nutrition and partner with that person so that when her clients need to talk about nutrition, she can hand them off to somebody who's really passionate about it so that she doesn't have to fake being excited about talking about calories and macronutrients. So what we're saying here, when Colin talks about intentional ignorance, whatever your role is, whether you're a salesperson or a leader or a manager, are there ways to build infrastructure around you so that you can be intentionally and intelligently ignorant about things that don't light you up, so that you don't have to show up in front of your customers or in front of your people trying to pretend like you're excited about something? Because there's a big difference in the way that you come across when you're talking about something that you're passionate about, that you're good at, that you're excited about, versus something that you have to. So look, there are certain things in all of our jobs that we just have to know, and certainly know those. But beyond that, is there a way to set yourself up with resources, whether it's people internal, people external, or otherwise, that can help you remain ignorant, quote unquote, about the things that you don't necessarily need to talk about because somebody else can do it instead?
Yeah, this is the conversation in vulnerability, and I'm sure people know that. Another word that's a little overused and a little buzzy. But you think about, we met an advertising technology leader, and she has been at the top of her game for the last 2 decades. And she told us that the moment that her career changed forever was when she stopped acting like she knew the answers, right? Because all she knew were the words. She didn't actually know the answers, and admitted to herself, I don't like tech. This is an advertising technology executive leader who is a hitter. And she said that her career changed when she realized that she didn't like tech, and that was okay because it gave her permission to like show up excited about building relationships and helping people with solving their problems. But as soon as they wanted to talk tech, she couldn't wait to say, I don't know. And then she would go and she'd find the answers. And she started realizing that her customers at the time were giving her more credit for being resourceful and going out and fighting for answers and not assuming that every person that she talks to is the same. So not having a cookie cutter answer ready, she was getting more credit for that than being a knower or exuding know-it-allism, even if she didn't know it. So this vulnerability, we saw, remember, this is a mindset book and it's a mindset class, and it's not about how to weaponize showing up and acting vulnerable and saying, I don't know, so that, you can be on the same team with your people. When we say vulnerability, it's the permission that people are giving them to show pieces of themselves that most of us are intentionally trying to hide, right? Most of us are trying to show up as this version of whatever the best version of ourselves is for that selling situation, because we don't think that our imperfect, flawed, authentic self is good enough to be, that in the interview, or that at, in the board meeting, or that, when you're raising money. So you show up and you try to be, the better version of that. But that's not actually what these people are doing. Like these people, here's the best example that we can give you. We were noticing that almost everyone in this book at some point or another, when we were interviewing them, started talking to themselves out loud in front of us. And like we can't unsee it now. Like if I wish we could meet you in person, because with spending an hour with you, I'm sure some of you do it too. We were talking to a great human being. Okay. He is like a high level sales leader at I call it $8.5 billion startup. Garrett makes fun of me. He says that's not a startup, whatever the case may be. Okay. He's a hitter, he's a leader, but he's a sales leader. So we know walking into this conversation, we are about to be sitting with one of the best sellers in the city. We're prepared, right? Like everybody else, right? Like we have our guard up, but our job is to look for the good, look for the bad, look for the friction, really just try to compartmentalize what's working and deconstruct the rest. And he gets on the Zoom and he goes, hey, nice to meet you guys. And we go, great, you too. Nice to meet you. Introduce yourself. And he goes, my name is Jason. I am a senior. And he stops, looks up at the ceiling and goes, why do I keep doing this? He was about to say senior vice president. He looks up and says, why do I keep doing this? He looks back down on us and he goes, can we start again? And Garrett and I are like, sure. He's like, hey, my name is Jason. I'm a philanthropist. I'm a speaker. I'm a father. I'm a senior vice president at. And whatever, we knew what he was doing. That was not the point or the point of this story. The point is that when we were done with this conversation, Garrett and I loved him too much. We could not help ourselves but look for the good in him for the last 45 minutes. So we rewound the tape and we were like, at what moment did he just get us? At what moment did he take us on some high that we never came back down? And it was those 3 seconds. It was this micro moment of connection because we knew he was a salesperson, because we knew he was a leader, because we knew he was a hitter, that when he talked to himself for those 3 seconds, we were like, he's really good. But for those 3 seconds, he wasn't selling us. And who knows?
And then we started seeing it everywhere. Like I think 2 weeks later, we're talking to one of the top trial lawyers in California, and he's telling us this story. We're not talking about the fact that we had identified this weird trait of people talking to themselves out loud. And he's telling us this story about how he's in front of a courtroom, judge, jury, making an argument for his client, and he's talking, and the judge interrupts him and asks him to repeat what he just said. And he goes, I stopped. I looked up. I said, what did I just say? Looked back down at the judge and I said, Your Honor, I have no idea what I just said. And the jury chuckles and the judge laughs. And for that moment, he's not a lawyer, which talk about a stereotype, right? That you have to overcome. He's not somebody who's just arguing and trying to say anything that he can in support of his client. But he was a human being who was nervous, just like everybody else probably in that room. And, it dispels this myth that we all have to be perfect all the time. Like, we just don't. People are attracted to imperfection because we're all imperfect. So we started seeing this type of thing all over the place, and we started calling it showing your work. So you remember in high school math class, when you wouldn't just get credit for the answer, you would actually have to show the steps that you took to get to the answer. And in the real world, this works too. People give you credit for showing the work, for letting them in on the process, on the thought process, on the uncertainty, on everything else. And these people are not doing this as a tactic. In fact, they didn't even know they were doing it. We just happened to have the luxury of talking to a bunch of these people in a row as we were preparing for the book. And we sort of noticed it. So it's not a tactic. They're just so comfortable and so vulnerable with the people that they're talking to that they give themselves permission to be flawed.
Speaking of vulnerable, I just realized that you're the only co-author of The Unsold Mindset. I must not have typed in my title. Just another example of me not following directions.
I should have deleted the co, and then people would think I wrote it all by myself.
I'm the other co-author, everyone. Okay, so let's just talk about the aha moment that we had when this all sort of came together for us with the book. So we're talking about these people that are excelling in their roles as leaders. And they don't know that they're doing the same thing that other people are doing that are also successful. They don't know that they're thinking the same way. But we're talking to all of them, and we're like, you guys are thinking, I mean, you're doing the exact same thing. And you'll see that they'll have their epiphanies only when we tell them, do you know that like General Stanley McChrystal also like gave us a story about being intentionally ignorant and not walking in the room and not wanting to be the smartest person in the room, even though he was? And, you'll just see their eyes open. So during lockdown, like at the height of lockdown, we noticed a really cool pattern. There were these groups of salespeople, two distinct groups across multiple verticals. And one of the groups, Group A, was doing really well during lockdown, but historically they were underperformers. And then there was another group that were not performing well during lockdown, but historically were on the top of the leaderboard. And so we started looking into the recordings and noticing a pattern. And the pattern was how the first 1 minute of the conversation sounded. And so when we knew that and we started to focus in on that, we saw that in both groups, the first 1 minute sounded almost identical, except completely opposite from each group. So like the first group, all of these introductions sounded something like this. Hey, thanks for showing up and accepting the calendar invite. I don't even know if we should be having this conversation right now. Like, yes, that's my 2-year-old behind me. Yes, that's my wife with a mask running, trying to catch him to put a mask on. We don't even know if we should be in the same room together. That is laundry that has not been folded yet because that is the classroom now until we know if we can go back to school. Anyways, I'm probably oversharing. I'm just telling you, this is weird. And I'm calling elephant out in the room now. And almost every time the person on the other end of the Zoom would go, oh, thank God you said that. This is so weird, right? This is my first pandemic too. You would watch them catch a vibe. You've never seen a prospect and a seller connect through some shared experience and be on the same team immediately. And as we were watching it, what we figured out through all of this research that we were doing in different realms of psychology, it all pointed back to they were giving themselves permission to share this piece of themselves because they assumed that the person they were talking to was going through the same thing. They assumed the person was going through something imperfect and that they gave themselves permission to be vulnerable. That is actually this microcosm for what we see at large with these great sellers in the book. They know that they are imperfect and that they are flawed. That is their authentic self, and they're trying to figure it out just like everyone else. They know that that person they're talking to is exactly the same. So they give themselves total permission to show them that, like, you are me. I see myself in you. Let me make sure you see yourself in me by just being honest. Like, why would you hide it? Why would you hide freaking out about COVID if you knew the person was freaking out about COVID? And it was fascinating to watch. And then the other group did exactly the opposite. They showed up like they always did. Hey, this is the agenda. This is the intent statement. Do a discovery. We'll go into the demo presentation. If you have any questions, save them for the end. Sound good? Meanwhile, you got like a 3-year-old like throwing ragu like on the white wall behind you, acting like it doesn't happen. So, anyways, we found that really interesting, and we think that that's really representative of what this authenticity and vulnerable conversation really exists for.
Yes, I want to move on to the next big bucket of topic that we found, but just to tie a bow on this authenticity, I think we've given you a bunch of examples of how these great leaders, how these great sellers, how these successful people give themselves permission to be authentic. But the biggest takeaway is to build the infrastructure around you to do that, whatever that means to you, whether it's, like I said before, having resources, or, Colin and I, when we started talking in front of groups of people, we would use slides. And we would do, because we thought that that's what speakers were supposed to do, is we're supposed to have slides and go down and have jokes on the slides. And as soon as we stopped with the slides and we started just riffing back and forth, we started having a lot more fun. We started learning more from the audiences that we were in front of. And it became a whole different thing. So for us to get rid of that restriction or constriction of having the slides was super helpful. So are there things in your role that you can do or that you can get rid of in order to give yourself that permission? So next big theme, Colin, I know we got a bunch of good stories for this one, is really something that all of these people seem to do is they look for the good in their situation and they find it. And I want to start with a polarizing word just for fun, even though we can't see faces here. And I want to talk about the L word a little bit, which is love. Can we talk about love and how that can impact the way that you show up when you interact with other people?
Mm-hmm. He does this often where he drops the word love without real context. And everyone's like, wait a minute, you were just talking about authenticity and realness for the last half an hour. And now you're going to fall in love with someone. And he's talking about the real word love, like the definition. I can de-cheese it a little bit, by asking you questions that a lot of these leaders, hopefully you have answers to, which is, how do people know you have their back? Like, how do people know that you believe in them? How do your people know you're looking for the good in them? How do other people know that you're looking for the good in them? We have found that the greatest sellers on the planet are good at a lot. But one thing that they are good at that not a lot of people are is being self-aware enough to know how malleable the brain is. Like, if you look for something, you will find it. If you look for the good in people, you will find it. And if you look for the bad in people, you will find it. And so many of us show up every single day into interactions with our people or with people that we want to spend time and money with us. And we're not looking for the good in them. We're looking for all the reasons that they are not going to buy, that they are not going to invest, that they are not going to do their job, so that we can mitigate those risks, when that's the opposite of what the greatest leaders on the planet are doing. And so let's de-cheesify love by giving you a love story. When I was engaged, my then fiance, now wife, was really into wedding planning. So much so that, like a good fiance that I am, when she requested access to my calendar, I gave it to her. And she would put wedding planning sessions in between my work sessions. That would cause me a lot to show up to meetings either late or right on time. And when I'd show up to these meetings, I would, I just call it like it is. I'd be like, hey, I should have been early. Like, I should have at least been on time. And I'm sorry. I've got this fiance. She's taking wedding planning really seriously. Today, we were talking about the difference between the bougainvillea and this tulip rose. It doesn't really matter. What's important is that I'm apologizing and I'm sorry. But almost every time, the reciprocation when I shared that part of myself, would be one of two answers. Either they'd say, Colin, don't worry about it. It's going to get way easier on your second marriage. They say that. That's like a true quote that I've heard multiple times. Or they say, Colin, don't worry about it. Like, I've been married for 30 years. Happy wife, happy life. The point is that when I was vulnerable enough to show this piece of me, because I assumed that they would get it, because most people have been in relationships before, they immediately looked for the good in me because they saw themselves in me when I said that. And then I immediately started looking for the good in them because I saw myself in them. You move differently when you are enamored with the people that you were talking to. Like, don't shortchange that. Like, the best version of Garrett Brown is the 14-year-old Garrett Brown who had a crush on somebody. I know her name, but he gets mad at me every time I say it because he's happily married, but I just get a kick out of saying his 14-year-old crush's name, but I'm not going to say it. Think about it. Think about when you had a crush on somebody. Like you weren't so confident that you would show up and talk more. You talked less. You listened more. You were enamored. The things that were coming out of their mouth were actually interesting to you. Even if it wasn't interesting to people around you, the jokes that came out of her mouth, Garrett really laughed. He really thought they were funny. He was looking for the good in the words. No one else was laughing around him. See, so like when you start to think about these relationships with your people, and yet you want your people to want to work for you and want to fight for you and want to raise you. Like, what does that look like? That means that you're looking for people to believe in you. So you have to do the same thing. You have to believe in them. Intentionally, you have to look for that good. And that's why Garrett drops L-bombs all over the place.
I do. And it's important because that's what a lot of this mind stuff is all about, is getting yourself into a place where you're showing up differently, where you're showing up in the way that Colin was just saying, where you're listening more because you care more. And so, you sound a lot different talking to somebody, whether it's your employee or a potential customer or anybody else. You sound way different talking to them when you care about them, when you love them. I'll go ahead and use it. Like, than you do if they're the 37th name on a list of 50 people that you have to talk to that day. You just do. And so, to give you a good takeaway here, as we're talking about this, one of the things that we like to talk about is we come from sales backgrounds, and there's this traditional sales tool that people will train you on called a 3x3. And they'll say that before any talking to any customer or potential customer, spend 3 minutes finding 3 things about them, doing research and learning about them so that you can use that in the conversation. So maybe it's like learning something that you can leverage to build rapport at the beginning, or maybe it's something that you can leverage because they've had an issue in the past that your product can help them with. Whatever the case may be, we never really liked that exercise, because the subtext of it is that you're leveraging it. You're using it against them sort of inauthentically. But we've altered it a little bit, and we've seen this change people's lives. And we say, instead of spending that 3 minutes looking for 3 things to leverage in the conversation, spend 3 minutes looking for 3 things that you love about the person. And that could be something big, like you go on their LinkedIn and you see that they're involved in a charity that you're really passionate about. It could be something small, like their Twitter profile picture makes you laugh. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, but find 3 things and get yourself in a mindset where you fall in love with this person, or at least the idea of this person, and see how different your conversation sounds. It's going to sound different.
Yeah. And I think that the real word that people should focus on, I think what you just said is, it's not a word, actually, it's a statement. If you think about love, like if you really think about love and you think about like what you would need to know about someone to fall in love with them, like you would have to know real answers to hard questions to actually have a shot of falling in love with someone. And so we do this like in our class, like we pair up our students. We go, hey, the senior defensive lineman on the USC football team who's about to go to the league, I want you to pair up with this freshman data scientist who just got here. And we pair them all up, and we tell them, you got 3 minutes to fall in love with each other. And they freak out. They freak out. You see their eyes. And we're like, we'll only give you one hint. Focus on the questions that you would need to know the answers to actually love them. And we go. And, you see it. They're all timid at first. And then 3 minutes later, it's a vibe. Like, oh, I fell in love with him. When did you fall in love with him? The minute I realized that he risked it all and left his parents and they're not in America, and he's all by himself. I know exactly what that feels like. Like, I left, like when nobody else did. Everybody stayed at the community college and I left. I love that he loves traveling. Like, I'm just starting to get into it. And like they drop the F-bomb all the time. It's fate. It's fate. It's fate. But it's not fate. You see, we told them to focus on the questions that they needed to have answers to realize if they loved somebody. And then they, in turn, went back and asked questions that were based on their morals, their values, their experiences. So the moment that they all fell in love with the people that they were talking to was the moment that they saw themselves in the other people. But before that, right, what they were doing, where they were asking questions in the hope of like, if the idea of this person, like if I could fall in love with the idea of who they could be, depending on what the answers were to these questions. And that led them to really ask questions they needed to know the answers to. take that, the idea of a person, and bring that into the enterprise. Garrett and I, we get called in a lot to consult for clients, and a lot of times these clients are our senior, like they're older than us, at least one of us for sure.
Somebody called you a geriatric millennial the other day, and I love that.
It's my sweater. And we walked into this room that was flatlining, and we had sort of like two engagements going on. It was leadership and it was the sales force, and it was like a two-way expectation exercise. It was really quite interesting. And on the sales force, there was someone there who was amazing. He had been the best salesperson on the team, and he'd been an industry vet for like 3 decades. So he was a hitter. And we walk in and we can tell like the rest of the room like doesn't really talk to him, and the rest of the room's not doing well. He is. Like it's the straight up 80-20 rule. He's generating 80% of the revenue himself. So we come in and we're like, hey, do us a favor. We're going to give you a lead. Take 3 minutes and fall in love with the lead, like in front of people. Just go online, like do some research, look for 3 things like you could love about them. Let's show these, let's show this team how it really works. And he goes, I'm not falling in love with anyone. By the way, like I don't need you here. I'm doing just fine. Thanks. And we're like, it's for the team. We know you're doing okay. But if you can show them the mindset of someone that is looking forward to talk to a prospect as opposed to someone who has to talk to a prospect and it comes from you, it'll work. And he's like, I'm not falling in love with this lead, guys. We're like, why? And he's like, because it's not a qualified lead. And we're like, fine, you don't have to take the lead. Just do the exercise and then we'll give the unqualified lead, because you're right, to a rookie. And he goes, fine. Opens up his laptop. Like a scene out of a movie. You have like people making a half circle around him. 3 minutes, go. Starts typing. 30 seconds in. Huh. Garrett and I. What? He graduated college the same year as me. You love that? No, I don't love that. Okay. A couple more seconds. Huh. What? He went to the University of Minnesota. You love the University of Minnesota. No, I don't love the University of Minnesota, guys. Right before his hands touch the keys again, he pulls them back and he looks at us and he goes, but Bob Dylan did go to the University of Minnesota. And Bob Dylan is my age. And I do love Bob Dylan. Big smile, sorry. And it worked. We were like, this is perfect. This guy has no idea. Like if this guy's a Dylan fan, he has no idea if he's cool, but we do know that he fell in love with the idea of who this guy could be, and everyone saw it. We're like, thank you. We're going to give this lead to a rookie. Let's see what happens. And he goes, not a chance. There's no way that I'm not going to figure out if this guy is who I think he is, which was even better. So he takes the lead, and it was unfortunately a disgusting bromance. Everything he hoped for was right. The guy was a Dylan fan. The guy saw Dylan. They had so much more in common, and the guy bought. And we get back into the room and we do an after-action review with the team. And this gentleman says, hey, I just want everyone to know that the guy didn't buy because I fell in love with him. He bought because our product served a need. And we said, yep, that makes a lot of sense. Except you would have never even been in front of that lead in the first place because you wouldn't have took it. So this idea around falling in love with the idea of who people can be, it's really transformational if you can take the time to look for the good in your people, and you will care different, you will ask different questions, and you will be that person.
I want to make sure we have time for one more big section. I see a couple questions rolling in, but it looks like we could probably at least have a few more minutes. I want to talk a little bit about goals and specifically purpose-driven goals. So, when we started writing our book and when we started creating our class, goals were really important to us. We are goal-driven people, and we wanted to learn about how these high performers and these great leaders thought about goals. So we start interviewing all of these amazing people and start asking them about their goals. And the weirdest thing would happen. They would start talking about their purpose instead. They didn't want to talk about their goals at all. They just wanted to talk about their purpose. We weren't asking for it. We weren't trying to. At one point, we were talking to the chief marketing officer of Atlassian, which for those of you who don't know is a massive global tech company, 250,000 customers. And literally, if you go back and watch the recording of our interview, 37 seconds in, he's articulating this beautiful, beautiful purpose and talking about why it influences the decisions that he makes and the people that he works with and the companies that he chooses to do business with. It was really weird. So we started digging in on this a little bit.
This is my favorite part, because what most people don't realize is that we weren't purpose-driven people, or at least we didn't know it. Like, we were goal-oriented. Like, we were going around asking people what their goal orientation was, because that's what we were used to. So when they were shoehorning the word purpose in and trying not to answer the question around how they structure goals, that's what led us to do the research. And we just found that it was fascinating, because when you find someone that has taken the time to create their purpose, they look at you different. It's hard to explain. Everybody knows that there's this person, they're in the middle of the room. You've got this magnetic energy. Like, you feel attracted to them. Like you have something special between you and them. And you're the only person that feels that way, that has that connection with that person. But everybody in the room feels the same way. What is that magnetic energy? I think what we found was that typically those are people that have their purpose articulated to the point where whoever they're talking to, they see their purpose in them. And like, you're going to move differently if the person that you're talking to is helping you serve your purpose versus someone that's going to help you, buy the house that you want, versus someone that's going to help you create, a new life for your kids with opportunities that, are going to exist well beyond, when you're here. Like, there are these conversations that these people were having. We go, hey, everyone who has goals, raise your hand. Everyone raises their hand. We go, only leave your hand up if you have your goals written down and you look at them every day, and half the hands go down. And then the hands that are up were like, now only leave your hands up if in addition to that, you have your goals articulated, and you also have a purpose statement articulated, and you look at it every day. And almost every hand goes down, except for like 2 or 3. And those are the people that risked it all. Those are the number one hitters. Those are the CEOs. Those are the leaders. Those are the ones that are so purpose driven that they see the people that they're talking to. And I could go on for hours about purpose, and I wish I could talk to you all, because I assume the leaders in this room, a lot of you are probably very purpose driven, but your people are not. A lot of your people are looking at goals like finish lines, and they need to be looking at them like mile markers. Because when you look at a goal like a finish line, how many of you have hit a goal and then been like, damn, I thought this was going to feel different? So we can talk more. I see what the time is on the clock.
There's some questions coming in, and I want to make sure we get to them. So let's make sure that the point is hammered home here, which is that, look, you need to have goals. And some of us goals are handed to us by the companies we work for, but we also set our own goals. You need to have those goals. But if you can also have a purpose and tie that purpose to those goals, so that when your goal is to, do $10 million in revenue this quarter, you can also add to that because, and then fill in the blank with whatever your purpose is. That is the way to make those goals become mile markers as opposed to finish lines. And that's the way to avoid acting unnaturally, because what a lot of people don't talk about is the downside of goals, which is what happens when a deadline is coming up and you're not going to hit that goal. That's when you start to act unnaturally. That's when you start to become the leader or the seller that you don't want to be. And you start to press and you start to push. And the worst of us might start to make things up or do things, that are unethical. So tying your goals to purpose is really important. Colin, let's tell a story about one of the most purpose-driven salespeople that ever worked for us. And then we will make sure that we get to some of these questions that are popping up in the chat.
Okay, cool. I see we got 12 minutes left. Let's talk about, I wanted to talk about psychics and couch cushions, but you're going to tell me we don't have enough time to do both, right?
Talk about couch cushions.
Okay, let's talk about couch cushions. There was this guy, and he was a rookie, and he was upsetting the number one salesperson on my team. And the number one salesperson on my team came up to me and said, hey, your rookie is like hoarding leads. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. Like, I get in the morning, he's already here. He's taken everything in San Francisco. Like, I leave at night, he's still here. He's taken everything in Sydney, Australia. Like, unless you want me to prospect in the Outback, you better talk to him. And this is my number one hitter. So I'm like, okay, I will. And I bring him in the office, I sit him down on the couch, and I've got this like brown sort of restoration hardware distressed couch. And he's sitting on it, and I go, hey, so I want to talk to you about something. And as I'm opening my mouth, he's like shaking his tuchus. He's like shaking his butt back and forth on the couch. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, man, this is a nice couch. I'm like, okay. All right, so look, here's what I'm going to talk to you about. As I open my mouth, he stands up, puts this butt in front of me, starts picking up the couch cushions until he finds the tag of who made the couch. And then he sits down on the couch, opens up his laptop, like if I'm not even in front of him, opens up his laptop. Now, listen, by the way, we know salespeople are weird. We're all weird. But this was a little weird. He opens up the laptop and he goes, "You have 5,000 employees." He's like, "You don't care if I prospect into them later, do you?" I go, "No." Closes the laptop, moves it over, goes, "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" And I said, "Absolutely nothing." This guy literally found deals and couch cushions. This whole conversation that we have had with you for the last hour is about looking for the good and finding it, looking for opportunities and finding them. This guy would drive to Vegas and he would send me screenshots of ads on the side of big rigs. He saw opportunities where no one saw opportunities. And the number one salesperson came up to me and told me there weren't enough opportunities. And those roles flipped really quickly. And that guy stayed the number one person until we ended up getting acquired by Google. So that's a conversation for a different day about abundance versus scarcity. But listen, at the end, let's close on this. If you want to be a great leader, and you probably already are, it's because you're really good at creating agency in the people that you are talking to. People will ignore you and people will say no to you because you are right. But if you can make sure that your people feel like they are part of the decision-making process, that they have agency, there's a lot of ways that you can do that, but you got to care differently. Because if you care differently, you will ask different questions. You'll ask a question they've never heard before. And whatever the answer is to that question, it's going to be the first time in real time that they come up with that answer. They own that answer. They take ownership. They're buying it. They're not being sold. So make sure, no matter what, and if you forget anything else of these rants that we had today, remember that agency is the most important thing that you cannot strip in order to be an effective leader and a great seller.
All right, let's get to some of these questions with the time that we have left together. So
right.
Kyle asks, how do you balance the desire to be authentic with the need to remain professional, especially as a person leading a team? And that's a really smart and self-aware question. When we were writing the book, we interviewed Ari Melber, who's a news anchor on MSNBC, I believe. And he is known for quoting hip hop lyrics while he's reading the news or in some of his news segments. And that's, not a normal thing for a news person to do. And we were talking to him and he's talking to us about the concept of like boundaries of authenticity. And he said that, he would be most comfortable sitting there reading people the news in jeans and a hoodie. But he knows that he would not be taken seriously. And there's a certain boundary in his profession where he has to wear a suit. And so he's found other ways to be creative and authentic. And one of those ways is by quoting hip hop lyrics when it's appropriate in his different segments. So there is a balance that needs to be done. And I think the direct answer to your question is having the self-awareness to know what those boundaries are, and then getting creative and finding that way to set up that infrastructure to give yourself permission to be authentic in the places where you actually can. And my guess is that's probably more places than you might think.
Yeah. On that note, Chef Roy Choi told us that he has lived multiple authentic lives, which is so beautiful if you think about that, because he's not putting himself in a box where authenticity has these barriers and he has to fit in it, because that's the opposite of authenticity, right? You can't act authentic by definition. So his authentic self as a chef, and an authentic self as a CEO, and his authentic self as a father, like these are all different people according to him. So I would say to you, think about what the authentic version of you as a leader is, and don't constrict yourself to thinking that has to be the same authentic person that you are with your wife or husband.
And Dallas asks a good question. What if you have to sell something you can't be passionate about? And, this is another one where we've talked to some amazing people who sell things that you probably couldn't be passionate about if you tried. And the one that comes to mind first is, Colin, we talked to a woman who was the #1 salesperson at a refuse services company. literally trash pickup, right? Like, no, I don't think, I shouldn't say nobody, but most people would not be passionate about trash pickup. Why was she so good? And we dug into this. And the reason she was so good, she wasn't passionate about the trash. She was passionate about her customers and the interactions that she got to have with them at different phases in their business. Like, they would call her for big events or for whatever reason where they needed like specific trash pickups. And she just loved being a part of that. She loved meeting people. So my answer to that question is like, are there ways that you can be passionate about your customers and the things that you get to do for them? Now, if your product sucks and it's not actually helping people and you're charging them money for something that's not going to benefit them, then you need to sell something else. But assuming that the product you're selling is benefiting them, whether you're passionate about the product or not, you should definitely be passionate about the people that you get to help by selling it.
Yeah, we do a lot of exercises with people that have this exact concern often. And the exercise net is deconstructing their job and looking at the areas that they love. But that is all about being able to have the mindset to want to look for it. I want to say this really quick story about psychics because it pisses Garrett off, but it's really funny. One of my really dear friends believes in psychics, and the psychic came up to him and said, "Hey, 3 great things are going to happen to you today." And my buddy called me and was like, "Oh my God, this psychic just read my fortune for free. He told me that 3 great things were going to happen to me today." And I'm like, "Okay." And then a couple hours later, he calls me. He's like, "Dog, you're not going to believe this." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "I'm at Chipotle." I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "They forgot to charge me for my double guac." Couldn't even make that up. A couple hours later, something just as trivial with like a ticket and like a meter person. Like, long story long, at the end of the day, these 3 great things happened to him, supposedly. So I asked him, I said, "Hey, let me ask you a question. What do you think would happen if the psychic told you 3 bad things were going to happen to you today?" We don't give enough credit that we will find whatever it is that we're looking for. So I think the direct question for you would be, do you want to look for the good in this job? Because if you do, for sure, you'll find it.
All right, let's try to rapid fire a couple more of these, Colin.
Okay.
David asks, how can you reprogram your thinking when you have lots of experience with people you're expected to collaborate with that are foot draggers? How do you turn around that relationship?
I like that question. This is a show your work question. I think we have students all the time that are like, "Hey, professors, I just don't want to show up to this interview and look like another like entitled like USC kid that's looking for an internship. Like, what should I say?" And we're like, "Say that. Show up to the interview and say, I got to tell you, I gave myself a lot of time to think about this, and I was concerned that I was just going to show up like another entitled." And after doing some research, what I've realized was like, you really value mentorship and you had a mentor. And so anyways, I'm just telling you like how I got here, right? Like, show the left side of the equal sign to these people. Like, there's a whole conversation we can give you on constructive feedback, and there's a great model for that. You should reach out to us for that because I think you'll love it. But in essence, you might just need to show them like what's going on in here before they hear what's coming out of your mouth. So maybe that sounds like I was trying to figure out like how to tell you guys that I really want urgency on this for whatever reason, but I didn't want to offend you. But so I was trying to think what the best way to do or how to approach that was. And honestly, I just like, after having a conversation with someone, you are awesome people and you will get it if I just honest with you. So I'm to be honest with you, like, this can't be like the other project. Like, this one has to be the one. It means something when you show them why you're saying what you're saying first.
Bobby asked, what are your methodologies for identifying and overcoming common objections? And before you answer that, Colin, I will say, we specifically focus on mindset. We intentionally didn't write a book about building rapport and handling objections because those books are out there and there's plenty of them. But as Colin mentioned at the very beginning, everybody's going to read those books, and 20% of people are going to be great, and 80% of people are still going to be trying to figure it out. And we believe that the reason for that is their mindset and the way that they approach those tactics. So with that, Colin, I'll let you take
I love that. That was great. There's only a minute left. So let me give you an example. Decades ago, unfortunately, it still exists, people would mirror their prospects. because someone a long time ago noticed that great salespeople are so engaged that they mirror. And so someone said, I'll just copy that. I'll just start like moving my arms when they move their arms and my legs when they cross their legs. But what they should have done was figured out how to be as engaged as the person that was mirroring, not how to act like you're mirroring. So when it comes to the objection, get them out as early as possible and don't act like you care. Like get fascinated and curious at the answers and find them out in front of them. And when you bring in resources, last but not least, when you bring in resources to go, hey, I don't have the answer to this, but I know someone smarter than me that does, you and the prospect are on the same team. We want to know the answer to this. We have a question. It's the easiest way from a mindset perspective.
Perfect. I know we didn't get to all of the questions. We are easy to find on social media,
please.
Twitter and Instagram at Colin and Garrett, or find us on LinkedIn. Send us those questions and we promise we will answer you. Thank you all for letting us hang out with you today and live out our purpose.
That's right.
Yes, thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Tons of questions. They will find you on LinkedIn, and yeah, go catch your flights.